Even in the middle of a recession, it's not difficult to see that the United Kingdom is still wealthy. The nation remains among the top 10 largest economies in the world, and per capita it's in the top 25. Brand UK is fashionable again, thanks to the multi-billion-pound Olympics, and there's no shortage of tourists, shoppers or investors. But even here in London, considered Europe's financial capital, levels of poverty and the number of children growing up in impoverished households is incredibly high. Almost a third of all children in London are living below the poverty line, and across the UK, those numbers are rising. With a total population of 62 million, the most recent figures show that 3.5 million children are growing up in poverty, and 1.6 million are facing severe poverty in Britain. A study by the British charity Save the Children has found that more than half of families in poverty are cutting back on food. Almost a third of families have nothing left to cut back on, and 1 in 4 parents say they sometimes skip meals themselves in order to feed their children.
Children see that their parents are stressed and worrying about money. Children are aware of their parents going without. Nearly half the children from the poorest families in our survey said that they saw their parents going without things like food or clothes for themselves just to make ends meet.
The charity, which normally works to help the impoverished overseas, has for the first time in its 93-year history launched an appeal for children in the UK.
It's very cold and we have to wear our coats all day to keep warm.
While the situation may seem less serious relative to the plight of families in some developing countries, the charity argues that in a nation with so much wealth, it simply shouldn't happen here.
Some children go without a hot meal every day, some children go without the right shoes or without a decent winter coat for school. And these are things that actually build up and have a strong impact on children growing up.
Studies showed that the majority of children in poverty are from working families. While food and fuel prices have soared, wages have remained static. In London, that's been compounded by rising housing costs.
For the first time in this country, apart from the late 1970s, since the Second World War, real wages are declining. And at the same time, there's a massive growth of part-time working, zero-hour contracts, and so the actual pay that people are receiving and the conditions under which they work are being squeezed in the labour market in a way that they haven't been probably since the Second World War.
June and Josh Wing live with their family in East London, just a few miles from where the lavish 2012 Olympics were held. Things changed for them when June became seriously ill 2 years ago. She's currently undergoing chemotherapy for cancer, and her husband Josh has been forced to leave his job to look after her and the children. The family has now joined the growing ranks of households across Britain struggling to make ends meet, whether in work, out of work, or unable to work. The impact on the household budget has meant cutting back on everything, to the point where the parents are even now cutting back on food.
I would feed the kids and I'll make sure there's enough for my husband, but I will say, no, I'm not hungry, I'll make up some excuses because there's not enough for me. And you do that during the week and that as well, don't you? With lunches and things like that, you'll go with that.
Do they know that you're going without?
The eldest one does, Emma. She'll say, what about you? So it's all right, we'll eat later, we'll have something later, we'll just get your kids sorted out, get you into the bed, and we'll have ours later.
My boy goes to me, my eldest boy, he says, Ryan, he turns around and says to me, is there enough milk for me to have a glass of milk or for me to have a milkshake, Mum? And I feel awful because at the end of the day, I should be able to provide for my children, whether or not I'm on benefits or not. You know, I'm ill.
I have to apologise and say, sorry mate, not today.
The family do receive some welfare benefits, but after years of paying into the welfare state, they feel the government simply isn't doing enough to support people in their position who've now fallen on hard times.
If I could get up and go to work, believe you me, I would. If my husband could, he would. I need him here. I need him to care for me. You've paid into it.
Struggling.
Before I had children, I was working full time. I paid my taxes. I paid my national insurance. Now, all I'm asking is for a bit of help. But I'm not getting the help because at the end of the day, I'm being punished for being a mum and for being at home all the time and for being ill.
We are probably
a bit better off than some.
And I just really feel sorry for people who are like similar to us or worse.
There's kids out there who don't even get a meal a day.
The economic crisis that was caused by the bankers is being paid for by cuts in welfare provision. So just at the point when very, very unprecedentedly large numbers of working people are being caught in the poverty trap, the ladder out, or the safety net as it's been called, is being removed. The elementary provision, disability benefit, for instance, is under attack. The benefit system when you're unemployed is being constantly squeezed. They're now talking about fining people if they don't do what the Social Security are telling them in terms of finding a job. So far from helping them out of poverty, they're pushing them further down.
If my money gets cut even more, I don't know what I'm going to do, because it's either feed your kids or your kids go without clothing, right? Or clothe your kids and they go without food. Which one are you going to do?
Today, amid recession and welfare reform, many in severe poverty are turning to charities in their desperation. In a quiet corner of the town of Salisbury, 2 hours' drive from London, staff at the Trussell Trust package up emergency supplies of food. The trust started out helping children in Bulgaria in Eastern Europe, but today it's found itself dedicating much of its time and resources to helping the impoverished on its own doorstep.
We give out a minimum of 3 days emergency food to local people who've hit a crisis. That's men, women, children. We're seeing working families coming to us, people who have been made redundant, people whose hours have been cut, who have been self-employed and gone from having 7 contracts to 2, and it's meant that they literally cannot afford to put food on the table. And a third of everyone we feed in a year are children.
The Trust has helped to set up 250 food banks across Britain. They operate on food donated by members of the public and are run by local communities. In the past year, they've seen a 100% rise in the number of people seeking help.
Poverty in the UK is often quite hidden. And so, we have people coming to us and they're really embarrassed because it's taken so much courage for them to even walk through the doors of a food bank, because they don't necessarily want to have to admit that they've got to a point where they can't feed their children that night. I spoke to a lady the other day who was breaking down in tears because she said that she'd been skipping meals. She hadn't eaten for 5 days, but that was the first day that she actually had no food to feed her children, and that's why she'd come to the food bank. But it'd taken that much for her to actually come to the food bank. In 2010-11 we fed 61,500 people. This year it's jumped to 128,697, which is massive. We've launched 100 food banks in the last year. We launched 100 food banks the year before that.
But donations of food have also risen to meet that demand.
It's that sort of mentality that actually it could be me, and people are really starting to understand that more. So we've seen huge levels of generosity throughout recession and the economic crisis, but it has been tight. So, food is going out as fast as it's coming in at lots of food banks.
Without doubt, the food banks are a lifeline to many, particularly at a time when cuts to welfare support, public services and a weak labour market are all heavily impacting low-income families. The government's austerity measures and financial policies, which it says it must implement in order to reduce the UK's massive budget deficit, have served to increase the financial disparity between the rich and the poor in Britain. Since March 2009, the UK government, through the Bank of England, has printed £375 billion of new money to help prop up the economy. That's helped the top 10% get richer by raising the value of shares and bonds. But for the 50% of UK households who have no financial assets and who arguably need that help the most, there's been no financial gain. And that's according to the Bank of England's own report.
If you get on the Jubilee line at Westminster, where the Houses of Parliament are, for every stop that you travel east, life expectancy in the capital falls by a single year. So by the time you're out in East London, you've got nearly a decade's difference in life expectancy. Now that shouldn't be happening. That was something that was supposed to be ended when Victorian London came to the end of its days. It shouldn't be happening in the 21st century. In London and elsewhere, actually, the gap between the rich and the poor is now greater than it was when Charles Dickens was writing Hard Times. 25 years, a generation now of neoliberal economics, begun in the late 1970s, first by the Labour government under Jim Callaghan, then by Margaret Thatcher. The Wall Street greed is good economy. This is the result of it. We always said that it would be, and this, after 25 years, is where we've got to. So the whole story that we were told about trickle down, about rebooting the economy, about everybody will benefit, that is now standing exposed as a gross lie.
Families like the Wings may not be particularly interested in politics, but they are acutely aware of what they see as the government's misplaced priorities.
How can they justify bailing out all these banks? They need to relook at all the priorities, because I don't think many people will think that war and the Olympics are a priority. I think children in your own backyard should come above everyone else.
I think it's becoming like to the old days again, where you have to steal a loaf of bread to get by.
Save the Children says the government needs to encourage more employers to pay a living wage, provide extra childcare support to help parents trying to get into work, and protect the poorest and most disadvantaged from further cuts. The government has restated its commitment to eradicating child poverty, while critics of Save the Children have accused it of seeking publicity and playing politics against the coalition government. But for the moment, the charity predicts a further 400,000 British children will fall into the poverty trap by 2015. Hassan Ghani for The Real News, London.